Welcome back to Mind Over Masculinity, the space where we stop pretending men have it all together and start talking about the kind of strength that actually holds up in real life. Today's conversation hits deep, and honestly, it hits that place inside a lot of men where we have taught to stay silent. We're exploring overcoming adversity and personal empowerment through self love. And if you hear self love and think bubble bath or cliches, buckle up because today's guest is about to flip that narrative upside down. Today I'm joined by Jonathon Aslay, one of America's leading midlife self love and relationship coaches. But his journey into this work didn't begin with success, it began with unimaginable grief. We'll talk more about that. But right now, his mission through his book, What the Heck is Self Love Anyway, is to help men and women return to themselves with courage, compassion, and real emotional tools. So today we are going there: grief, healing, identity, and why self love might be the most masculine thing a man can practice. So let's get into it. Welcome to the show, Jonathan. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here with me today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Sayan. This will be a fun conversation.
Yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation, Jonathan, because a lot of people um, probably say it's a bit cliche,
Yeah.
but before we talk about self-love or rebuilding identity, we have to talk about where your journey truly began. Because I think most men listening to this right now need to hear the real origin of your mission, not the polished version or the human one. So I want to ask you, Jonathan, before we take deep, losing your son, Connor, to change everything. What grief or what did grief teach you about yourself that you hadn't seen before?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. Well, in a way, before I talk about that, I think it's almost important for everyone to hear this that my my biggest, not my biggest, but one of the most challenging times in my life is when my identity was crushed, particularly my masculine male identity. And just to give some context to the listeners, I was born, I'm a tail end baby boomer. I was born in the mid 60s. Um, I grew up with a movie called Wall Street that talked about greed is good. And it was chase money sort of thing. But I had a script going up. It was to go to college, get a job, meet someone, get married, buy a house, start a family. And I followed that script. At age 29, I got married. I'd already established myself professionally. But about 12 years into my marriage, and I went into the marriage very unconscious, and my now ex-wife, recognized that we were misaligned and she ended the relationship. But at the same time, I lost my high-end corporate job and I got wiped out in the market crash of 2008, 2009. And my point in bringing this up is I was devastated. My identity died. And for the next 6 years, I went to bed wishing I didn't wake up. I did drugs and alcohol just to get through the day. And online dating was one of my other drugs of choice. And what I mean is, communicating, talking. And this was in the infancy stage of online dating, Cheyenne. So a little bit different than where we are today, well before swiping. And
Yeah.
why I bring this up is that during this period of time, I began a practice of personal development, self help, spiritual work. Unbeknownst to me, it was self love. But at the time, I didn't see it as self love. It was more about rebuilding my identity from the inside out. And as I began doing this work, like I said, personal development, self help, spiritual work, and I should have mentioned therapy, I was, as I said, rebuilding my identity, but more importantly, finding out that it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to have insecurities. It's okay to have fears because I was experiencing it all. And as men, we are told to stuff our emotions and stuff it. And when quite frankly, it was the exact opposite of what I needed was to expand on my emotions, to understand my emotions, to navigate my thoughts, which created those fears and insecurities. And little by little, I was rewiring my life, if you will, or reprogramming myself. So by the time that my son passed away, that you mentioned, I had already built the emotional scaffolding to navigate this loss. But through the
Mm.
loss, it embraced me to really lean into what does it mean to love myself and what does it mean to love others? And that's what encouraged me to begin writing my book. And it was while my son was one catalyst, it really the journey began a decade earlier
Way
when I
back.
lost my identity.
Wow. Left speechless actually. That's like a lot of things happening or has happened at once, Jonathan. And that's the kind of honesty I think most men would never say out loud, even when they're drowning. And instead
Yeah.
they would and I think a lot of them would find themselves spiraling down, just hearing a story like that.
Yeah.
But thank you, Jonathan, for sharing that with us today on this podcast. And it makes me think about the tools we don't give men, right? The inner foundation that keeps you afloat, especially when life hits hard. And there's a phase in everybody's life, right? And
Yeah.
um, which brings me to something you teach so powerfully is that self-love is not as a fluff, but as survival. Uh, my question to you, Jonathan, would be what made you realize that self-love is actually the foundation of emotional survival, especially for men?
Yeah. So, it's interesting to kind of give you my perception of what self-love is. So, because some people think it's manicures and pedicures and self-care, and a lot of women can view it that way, but there's so much more to it. And by the way, I'm
Right.
saying a small subset of women. I mean, I didn't want to create a judgment around women. So the way I look at self-love is to think of the words like self-worth, self esteem, self confidence, self reliance, self discipline. All of these juicy self words just wrapped in the word love. But more importantly, it's the recognition that all we human beings have, excuse me, us adult human beings, I should say, we all have an emotional 6-year old inside of us that's oftentimes running the show. What I mean is, we can have fears, we can have insecurities, we could have negative patterns, we could have limiting beliefs, we could have judgments that's often being run by this little emotional 6-year old, and whatever age
Right.
bracket works for you. Self-love is holding that little emotional 6-year old inside of us the way you would actually treat a 6-year old child, whether it was yours or someone else's. We would treat it with such reverence, such compassion, such care, such empathy. And so if
Mm.
we would do it for our own children or someone else's child, how about doing it for the inner child within us? And so um, I look at self love as a practice to embody all of those juicy words I said before. And let me just say this, Cheyenne, this is not a place we ever actualize fully. I think maybe
Yeah.
minutes before our death, is when we're fully actualized to a next evolution of ourselves. It's more of a practice. And here's the thing about men, and I know to the guys listening, you have been told that you should not show fear or insecurities because it represents weakness.
Mm.
And to some degree, if you're drowning in it and you're not asking for help, and if you're constantly complaining and you're not taking action in your life, if you're in victim consciousness, well, it is very unattractive, particularly to the opposite sex. But to share an insecurity and a fear from an empowered place of how can I improve, from that place of how can I grow, from that place I want to overcome this, that's not only, you know, vulnerability isn't just brave, it's actually attractive to the opposite
Mm.
sex when it comes from an empowered place of vulnerability. Now, here's the thing. You might be so scared it's hard to even come from that empowered place. Well, then go seek professionals that can actually help navigate this, whether it's a coach, whether it's a spiritual teacher, maybe it's even a therapist, a counselor, a mentor, someone where you can process your thoughts and feelings in a very safe container. And that can be a challenge, and I get it. And yet I want to encourage every man who's listening to this is do your best to develop a confidant in your life, somebody that you can sit there and share your bloody truth. Okay. Let me reframe that, your messy truth, not bloody truth, but your messy truth, to someone who can hold that container and says, and for one, by just venting, you're letting it out, most importantly. But sadly, a lot of young men today, you know where they let it out? They let it out watching
Mm,
porn. They follow Reddit. They follow the manosphere. They follow the red pill. They're following all this noise that's just keeping them stuff down. It's not empowerment.
mm,
It's not giving you the
yeah.
tools to grow. And let me just
Yeah.
say something about my book. It's a very simplistic book. It is not like it's really to some degree for the beginner to just maybe take a step in the right direction of loving oneself. And then be curious, be thirsty to want to grow both your emotional health, your intellectual health, your physical health, your spiritual health. Like, start feeding that, and let me just say this too, please feed it with positivity. There is so much negativity out. I watch these, I read Reddit columns, and I'm like, I'm almost gonna I feel like someone's vomited on me. That's how painful it is to read, particularly from young men that are being encouraged to just, you're being vomited on, and it's not healthy. So it's actually
Right.
toxic. And so my invitation is to listen to a podcast like what you're listening to now for empowerment tools, not a reminder to say women are all bad and that they're the problem in romantic love, and society is against you and everything. And if nothing else, simply take one step forward in your life, just in some positive movement. Maybe it's 15 minutes. Maybe it's doing a meditation practice. Maybe it's listening to a podcast that is empowering, and do it again and again and again. And I guarantee you do this for 6 months straight, your life will start to even improve if you're feeling like you're down.
Mm, exactly, Jonathan. And this thing about I would say what you talked about, right? Whether it could be Reddit or pornography. I think there's this dopamine trap that most men, right, get get themselves trapped in, to escape from the reality, right? And men also confuse self love with weakness, when it's actually the root of every strong decision we make.
Yeah.
Um, and what's interesting is that confusion really shows up everywhere, especially in dating and relationships, since we're talking about it, because most of the time, what looks like a relationship problem is actually a self-worth problem
Yeah.
underneath, right? So I want to go into that next, Jonathan. So you see, most singles aren't just struggling with dating; they're struggling with self-worth,
Yeah.
I think. And how did you start seeing that pattern show up again and again?
Wow, that's one of the toughest questions to answer. I believe it starts with what are the thoughts you're feeding yourself about yourself? Now, this is very difficult because in coming back to talking about social media, you're being fed thoughts of what's wrong with men in general, but what about yourself? Like,
Mm,
what are the thoughts you say about yourself? If you say, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, I'm not likable, on a subconscious level, then guess what? You're going to feel all those things. So I would say one of the best practices is start to adopt an affirmation practice of a meditation practice, an affirmation practice of start feeding just the thoughts that you would say to a 6-year old. I want you to think of that. What would you say to a 6-year old that lacks self worth? What would you say to that 6-year old? You're a wonderful human being. You're beautiful. You're kind. You're loving, compassion. Start start the self-talk within oneself to that the way you talk to a 6-year-old, talk to your emotional 6-year-old like this. Now, this isn't easy. Let me just say this. And we humans have, I believe, somewhere between, I don't know, 10 to 30,000 thoughts every single day. Now some of them are as simple as brushing your teeth and, tying your shoe and eating and that sort of thing. But what about that noise that's going on behind your head? And it's learning how to talk to the roommate in your head. I like the way the book Untethered Soul by Michael Singer talks about the roommate in our head. In fact, I believe that would be a wonderful book to read. Now, here's the thing. If you decide to buy it after listening, it's called The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. Here's your instructions. Only read one chapter at a time and let it sit for a day or two. It is that intense, okay? It's not like a novel, like a Game of Thrones novel or something else, John Grisham or one of those authors. This is a very complex way of learning how to talk to the voices in our head. And since we oftentimes have a repeating cycle, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, I'm not likable, the self-worth. It's reprogramming it the way you would do for, I bet there are a lot of uh, men listening that are programmers, maybe former programmers
Right.
now that AI has taken over, but you think of line of code, right? Well, if you've got bad code, you have to rewrite new code to overcome the bad code. And that's what a self-love practice would include. And
Mm,
and my hope is someone listens to it and says, "You know what? I'm going to wake up. I'm going to do something different today. Just one step forward in loving yourself." Now, it could mean also doing something physical like exercise, like walking or like weightlifting or something like that. That's a great practice to have. Also, another great self-love practice is socialize with people. I tell men in particular, l take dancing classes. Go to I mean, I don't know where it is how it is where you live, but, here we have salsa, we have country, we have
yeah.
a swing, we have all these different classes people could take, and why men need to take this first and foremost is there's more women there than there are men, okay? And you learn rhythm, you learn connecting, you learn how to overcome the fear of just asking someone to dance in a non-romantic setting. The beauty is if you take a dance class, you're encouraged to walk up to a strange woman and ask her to dance, okay? It's scary
Mm,
enough to do that in the real world, but do it in because it's non-romantic. It's a great place. Start with something like that. As simple as that
mm,
to build a little bit of the muscle. And I'm just going to tell you something. Once you build one little bit of a muscle and a little bit more, and a little bit more, you'll get to a tipping point where you'll be going, I feel better about myself. Now, here's the thing
mhm.
to the guys listening. I've been at this for a decade and a half, and I'm still scratching the ant's belly. Okay. I mean, to really embrace self love. But I will tell you, I'm 1,000 miles ahead of where I was 15 years ago. And that's okay too. Because like, one of my favorite quotes is by Walt Disney. It's keep moving forward. Keep nourishing your soul with loving things for yourself, just a little bit each day. Let's get off of the social media noise that's telling us how bad it is and how terrible it is and start filling it with joy. And joy can come as simple as, I was listening to a Buddhist um, podcast, and just sitting outside for just a few minutes, just appreciating the beauty of nature as an example, just to sit with it for just 3 minutes and just appreciate nature. And appreciation is one of the beautiful tools of self-love is learning to appreciate. In many cases,
Mm,
if you look at your life, you may think it's not as great as someone else's, but believe me, in many cases, it's a lot better than others. And be in a state of gratitude for what you have. That's a great practice too. And my hope is, I hope is you feel encouraged because guys listening, I was at the bottom. I went to bed wishing I didn't wake up. That's how bad it was for me. And I also reached out for help. I actually went to my father at age 45. And let me just share something with everyone. I used to live in a $2.2 million home in Los Angeles to the point where I had to move in with my mother and father. That's how bad it got. But I asked my dad for help because it started with the person who loved me first was mom and dad. Ask for help. There is no shame in asking for help. Anyway, that's a couple things.
Hmm. Yeah, indeed. I think a lot of things that you talked about, Jonathan, really resonates with me, right? Right from the relationship advices to, I would say, how most of us think self love is cliche, but it isn't, right? I mean, it just looks like cliche because a man has, or maybe most of the men have never practiced it before, right? But it's a beautiful way, I think, to reconnect with ourselves. And honestly, that's the biggest key takeaway for me today, Jonathan. Right? And thank you so much for grounding us to that truth. And yeah, just before we wrap this off, I would just love to ask Jonathan, what's the best way to reach out to you who's listening to this right now?
Oh, well, thank you so much for an opportunity to share. You're a delightful host. I just want you to know that. My name is listed here. It's Jonathon Aslay. Just simply cut and paste it, put it in Google. The first thing that will come up is my YouTube channel. I have a channel that's in my name, and I also have a channel that's Jonathon Aslay for Men. Um, the content kind of goes back and forth. You can also check out my website. It'll be right there on Google. You can get my book called What the Heck is Self-Love Anyway? Those will be the first three things that pop up on Google. And if you want to reach out to me, and I've had men reach out to me. I had a man who reached out to me recently, never married, 40 years old, never been intimate with a woman. And we brought him on the podcast and we had a great conversation and the women loved him. So if you want, message me, and maybe if you want, we can put you on my YouTube channel with over 200,000 followers, and maybe get you a girlfriend that way.
Perfect. Perfect, Jonathan. Dear listeners, I'll have the details in the show notes for you so you can check out Jonathan's work and his book, What the Heck is Self Love Anyway, at your own convenience. And with that, we hit today's mark on today's episode about self love. What Jonathan really shared today is a reminder that adversity doesn't really define us, it refines us. And self-love isn't a luxury, it's a lifeline, right? And if Jonathan's message spoke to you, I would recommend grab his book, What the Heck is Self-Love Anyway, and connect with him for more powerful tools to reclaim your worth. And it's also about remembering who you have always been. This is Mind Over Masculinity, and I'm Sayan. Stay grounded, stay open, and keep choosing yourself one brave moment at a time.